Today I'm back with 4 more quick and easy Dollar Tree DIYs, perfect for your fall decor. And I think I have a good variety here, something for every style. So curl up with your fuzzy, warm blanket and a hot apple cider and let's get started. In my last video, I promised one more Dollar Tree pumpkin DIY, so I'm going to start with that. It's just one of their styrofoam pumpkins that's been given a base coat of the plaster color by Waverly. Next, I grabbed my celery color by Waverly as well, and my favorite chippy brush for my dry brush technique. I dip the brush ever so slightly into the paint. I actually just used the paint lid. Dab most of it off and then gently brush onto the surface of the pumpkin. Then I follow it with a baby wipe and wipe back and forth in the same direction to blend it. I continue with this method around the whole pumpkin. Then using the same brush and wipe method, I add the moss color, also by Waverly, sparingly around the container. The wipe still has some of that celery color left over from the previous steps, so this blends the colors beautifully. I wanted the pumpkin to look like it had been outside for a while and has the beginnings of moss growing on it, so I decided to apply the moss color a little more heavily around the bottom of the pumpkin and then here and there up the sides. I used the same brush to apply the paint, but this time skipped the blending. This is where you can apply as much or as little as you like to get your desired look. Next, it's time to add some succulents. I have some from Dollar Tree, and then I also have some that I got from Amazon. I'll provide the links for the Amazon ones in the description box below if anyone's interested. I played around with different placement. I liked having a mixture of shapes and sizes and colors, and I wanted to have a couple wispy vines creeping down the sides. Once I was happy with my succulents, I added some reindeer moss to cover any spaces. Dollar Tree has a couple different kinds of moss, but I like this moss the best. I love the softness and the dimension that it adds to the piece. And here's the completed look on my counter. I absolutely love how this turned out. I think it's Farmhouse with a little bit of a boho flair to it, and it's perfect for early fall before we're ready to get out all the jack-o'-lanterns. For my next project, I'm using one of these Dollar Tree jars. I thought the shape with the ridges already looked a lot like a pumpkin, so that's the direction I'm going. And I just gave it a quick coat of the plaster color by Waverly. While I'm painting, I'll mention that this video is part of Heidi Sonboul's Fall Challenge. Heidi's the queen of home decor DIY, so I'm sure you're already familiar with her channel, but I'll link it in the description box below as well as the playlist for the challenge, so be sure to check out her channel and then hop to the playlist to see what everyone comes up with. As for the lid, I gave it a coat of black chalk paint. I used the ink color by Waverly, and I realized after the fact that the majority of the time I was painting the lid off camera, so I had to cut that out. I'm still getting used to my new studio setup. Then while I had the ink paint out, I also painted a few wood beads from Dollar Tree. I'm going to use one as a little knob on the top of my container, and a little trick I use is to string the beads on a skewer. This makes it so that they don't roll around while I'm painting and I can paint a few all at once. Once the lid was dry, I painted just the very top with the plaster color. In order to ensure that the paint didn't run down the side of the lid, I used a small roller, but then the roller wasn't filling in the little ridges on the top, so I used a brush to get inside all the cracks and then rolled over that to smooth it out. This worked really well. Next, it was time to give my jar a little bit of a distressed look. Instead of sanding, I skipped the mess and used my black wax. I tried a couple different brushes for the application, but what ended up giving me the look I was going for was a small piece of sponge. I wanted it to look like scuffs and chips, and I think the sponge accomplished this. I randomly blotted around the container and then focused on the top and bottom rims where the jar would see the most wear. Next, I printed out a pumpkin face I liked and used my favorite Arteza carbon paper to transfer the outline to the jar. It was a little bit awkward because of the ridges, but I taped the image in place so it wouldn't slide. I also centered the nose on one of the ridges so that the face would look centered on a side. I used more of the ink paint to fill in the face. You'll notice that I'm terrible at painting by hand and have to turn the jar a bunch of times to get different angles. It'd probably be a lot easier to fill in with a Sharpie, but I've used Sharpie in the past on a few different signs and noticed that sometimes the ink fades over time. I'm not sure what caused that, possibly the Sharpie breaking down the paint in some way. I'm not sure. So yeah, I used paint, but you can use whatever medium you like. And now that the lid is dry, you see me using my black wax to add some of the scuffs and chip marks to it too. And for the final little touch, I added the bead to the lid to look like a little knob. Here you see me using hot glue to attach it. That would work if no one touches it, but it didn't hold very well, so I ended up using super glue, which I didn't capture on film. And here he is. Isn't he handsome? I think I'm going to cover him with either polyacrylic or Mod Podge to give him more of a satin look, but I think this guy will look amazing on my kitchen windowsill or a bathroom sink. He's even small enough that he might even fit on a tiered tray. Moving on to my next project, I saw these Coffin board signs at Dollar Tree, which I think are new this year, and I'm not really into spooky decor for Halloween, but when I turned the sign upside down, I thought it was a great shape for a face with a hat, so that's how my scarecrow was born. I've seen scarecrow signs before, but wanted to put my own little spin on it. And one of the planks from one of these little tabletop word signs was the perfect size to make the brim to my guy's hat. The signs are super easy to deconstruct, and I used the largest plank, which is the front of the sign. I marked roughly where the brim would be and painted the top with the plaster color by Waverly and the bottom with the mineral color. I think in the future I will first paint over the sign with black in order to cover the lettering better, because it took me several coats to get good coverage. I liked the idea of a more traditional plaid hat for my scarecrow, so I'm going to construct that with tape. As is typical for plaid, I wanted to have some thicker and some thinner lines. I started with a thin strip of masking tape down the center. It's narrower than painter's tape, I think about 0.7 inches wide. Then I placed another strip on either side and removed the center strip. Then I placed another strip on either side, leaving about 1/4 inch of space in between the strips. That'll be the thinner line. I followed this pattern of alternating thick and thin lines out in each direction until I reached the edges. Now here's where you can put your own little spin on it and use whatever colors you like, but we live in Columbus, Ohio, and we're all Ohio State Buckeye fans around here, so I wanted my scarecrow to be a Buckeye with a scarlet and gray plaid hat. However, you could also skip the paint altogether and just cover the hat with a fabric or even scrapbook paper you like. For the vertical lines, I'm painting the thick lines with the crimson color by Waverly and the thin lines with the elephant color. I used a stencil pouncer to apply the paint so it's nice and thin and won't run under the tape. And here's my favorite part. I have this weird obsession with the tape removal, so I didn't want to skip over this part. I love how it reveals the perfect crisp lines, and I just find it so satisfying. I really don't think I'm alone in this. Let me know in the comments if you're obsessed too. While my first batch of stripes are drying, I used my dry brush and baby wipe technique to add Granite Gray by Apple Barrel and Plaster by Waverly. I like the dimension this added, and the result was a lighter gray, which was more complementary to the scarlet and gray color scheme I had going on. To save some time, I skipped ahead and didn't show the part where I laid down the tape, but I did follow the same pattern for the horizontal stripes, starting in the middle with a thick stripe and working outward to the top and bottom, alternating thick and thin. This time I switched colors though. I'm painting the thick stripes with the elephant color and the thin ones with the crimson. I plan to use red embellishments, so the brim will be gray, and it worked perfectly to skip the last thick stripe, and that will be where the brim will be. And the tape peeling part again. Here you see me quickly painting over the brim board with the same dark gray elephant color. Okay, now for the face. I decided to use a teardrop shape for the eyes and a sort of trapezoid shape for the nose. I just used a basic curve for the smile, but used dashes to make it look like it was stitched. I used the largest funnel from the packs available at Dollar Tree for my guideline for the smile, and I don't really trust myself freehanding things, so I mapped it out using cutout pieces and then used my Arteza carbon paper to transfer it to the board. I use this carbon paper in almost every DIY I've done on my channel, and the Arteza is the very best. I've mentioned many times before that I'm a lefty and I tend to drag my hand, and this Arteza paper is the first carbon paper that didn't result in any smudges. I also used carbon paper to transfer the words "Go Bucks" to the brim of the hat, but again, here is where you can run with it and make it your own. You could do just a simple welcome or happy fall y'all, or you could totally just leave it plain too. I think I mentioned in a previous video that I'm participating in a craft show this month and I wanted to have some fall signs. I decided to have a couple Ohio State options because that's what sells around here. We live in a suburb right next to the university and a lot of faculty reside in our area, so Buckeye merch is always popular. I used a silver paint pen from Dollar Tree to fill in the letters. When used on top of chalk paint, the silver pen doesn't really have a metallic finish. It just basically looks light gray, which works great for my Buckeye themed guy. These pins come in quite a few different colors at Dollar Tree. If you've been with my channel for a while, you know I love the gold ones on distressed signs, but I have yet to use the blue or pink ones, but I do have them and I'm just waiting for the right DIY to come along, I guess. In order to save some time, I skipped over where I painted the eyes and mouth with black chalk paint. I also intend for the nose to be orange, but the orange paint is super thin and it was showing some of the pencil markings, so I quickly painted a layer of white chalk paint and I'll go over it later. Right now I'm concentrating on his hair. My local Dollar Tree didn't have raffia when I was there last weekend, so instead I'm using a Hula skirt that was left over from their summer decor. I'm gluing clumps of hair to the back of the brim. I found it easiest to take about 4 strands and loop them around and glue them together and then trim off the top. So I followed that process across the brim, and on either side of his head I had a few longer strands that hung down. I used a combination of super glue and hot glue to attach the brim. I just put the super glue on the back of the brim and the hot glue on the base. The super glue will provide a long-lasting, strong hold, while the hot glue provides an immediate hold. Now for some embellishments, a few red leaves from a fall pick, and then one of those floral stalks that are like a dark burgundy red. I'm not even sure what these would be called, but it looks almost like a small corn cob. I actually think it sort of looks like a feather in his hat. I used red burlap to make a little bow tie. I just looped the burlap around itself, pinched in the middle, and secured it with some red twine. Then I glued it to the board and it conveniently covered the hole that was left over from the original hanger for the coffin sign. My, have we come a long way from that coffin. And finally, I just quickly paint over the nose with my pumpkin color from Apple Barrel Paints, and my Ohio State scarecrow is complete. Wow, I love how he turned out. He can just stand on a porch like I have him here, or you could easily make a hanger in the back and hang him on a door. So maybe you aren't a Buckeye fan, maybe you're even from that wretched team up north, but hopefully this inspired you to look past some things' current state. Turn it around, turn it upside down, and just use your imagination. You never know what you'll come up with. Okay, so we made it to my last DIY today, and I may have saved the best for last. I'm recreating a luminary I made last year that is probably the main DIY that inspired me to start my channel. I'm going to take this plastic food storage container and a funnel, both from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to make them look like an old vintage oil can. Having trouble picturing it? Bear with me, we'll get there. So these plastic containers are found with the Tupperware at Dollar Tree, and they have blue lids and come in a pack of 2 for $1. The carbon transfer paper doesn't work on plastic, so what I did was draw the face I like on a grocery bag, and then I just taped it to the inside of the container and traced it that way. Next, I used my hot knife to cut out the face so that there were actual openings. I'll link the hot knife I used in the description box below, but if you don't have a hot knife, you can create your own by holding a utility knife to a flame for about 15 seconds and then cutting with that. It melts through the plastic very easily. In fact, the oil can luminary that I made last year was made with the utility knife method, so I can assure you it works. Then I used my hot glue gun to apply what will hopefully look like old oil drips around the top and down the sides of the funnel. Next, I went outside to apply a coat of black matte spray paint. I didn't do this last year, and when I got the luminaries out this year, I noticed that some of the paint was peeling off. I was thinking about selling these at my craft show, so I wanted a more permanent coat. The spray paint is a paint and primer in one, so it'll bond to the plastic and act as a good base coat. If you don't have spray paint, just use primer first, or skip this step altogether if you aren't really concerned with longevity. Now I'm back inside and I let the spray paint dry for several hours, and then I gave both pieces a quick coat of the elephant color by Waverly. I'm creating a galvanized look, and I've seen some people use black instead of dark gray, so you could definitely skip the elephant color if you don't have it. I just think the dark gray is a closer match to the actual color that naturally appears in real galvanized metal. Once those were dry, I used a dry sponge to apply a silver color. I absolutely love Martha Stewart's polished silver for this. I'm telling you, a little of this paint goes a really long way. I bought a 16-ounce container of it about 7 years ago, and while the container was replaced along the lines at some point with the Tupperware container, the paint is still going strong. I usually just dab the sponge onto the lid, blot some of the paint off, and then pounce it onto the container. Because of the holes in the sponge, it leaves places where the original dark gray color shows through, which is exactly what we want for the galvanized look. The next color is Granite Gray from Apple Barrel. This is the same tone as the silver paint, but has a matte finish to it, so our container is starting to take on a weathered look. You can apply as much or as little as you want to achieve your desired look. I like to use it more sparingly than the silver so that there are just weathered spots here and there throughout the container, and you really can't mess this up. If you apply more than you like, just go back and apply a little more of the other colors. Finally, I'm adding a rusty brown color. I like to use nutmeg brown from Apple Barrel, but burnt umber would work here as well, or a lot of different brown colors. I'm focusing on areas that would get more wear, like around the upper and lower rims and around the face cutouts, and also on the funnel part, especially the drip spots around the spout. Then I'm adding it sparingly around the container. Again, you can take this really far and make the whole container look rusty, or more sparingly like I'm doing here. And again, if you put too much on, go back and use one of the other colors. This process is pretty much foolproof. And here he is. I think this guy reminds me of the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz, and I love that he can be used as a real luminary too. Because this is plastic, just remember to only use battery-operated candles. They come in a pack of 2 from Dollar Tree, so it's safer and it won't break the bank. Win-win. So there you have it. I hope these fall DIYs inspired you to think outside the box a little and get creative this fall. And if you found me from Heidi's playlist, I'd love for you to stick around and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you can stay up to date with my content. We're heading into the busy season for the DIY world, and I have lots up my sleeve that you won't want to miss. So stay tuned for that. See you next time. Bye.